Hi, Namaste. My name is Henry Shadikar, and this is part 2 on my series where I give comments on the excellent book of Henry Doctovsky called The 11 Naked Emperor. I knew most of those 11 people, and I thought I would give some comment, some histories of my dealing with those people. Henry has been very kind to call those people naked emperor. In reality, they were more like hippies, gangsters, cheaters, and some were murderers. And today I would like to start with the most famous, Jayapataka. I met Jayapataka sometime in 1970 when I helped open the Calcutta temple with Swami Bhaktivedanta being present. It was the first time that I met a devotee that had taken the vows of being a sannyasin. He thought that he was better than anybody else. He had some talents. He was speaking already fluent Bengali. I was basically one of the only one there that was a brahmachari. So as soon as I arrived in Calcutta, I remember him throwing his clothes at me and saying, "You're a brahmachari, I'm a sannyasi, you wash my clothes from now on." For a few months I had to wash his clothes because I was just a lowly brahmachari. One of the things that I remember about him is that he was a voracious eater. We would eat one plate, he would eat 2-3 plates of food. And I was not surprised that eventually he had this problem that made him paralyzed, took him at the door of death. He was probably one of the most sincere person of the 11. But he knew about all the scams. He knew about the homosexuality. He was in charge of the schools of HARE KRISHNA in India, where dozens, possibly 100 or more kids were sexually abused by teacher, including Bhavananda. But that was the time to shut up, to get in line, and with everybody else declare himself to be now a spiritual master. Apparently, he has now more than 50,000 disciples. He has been there through all the scandals, the lies and deceits, and to this day, he is still covering up for all the lies and deceits of all the Hare Krishna Guru that number more than 100 in ISKCON at this present moment. And then there is Hridayananda. I met Hridayananda for the first time sometime in 1972. In Los Angeles. It was strange because he arrived to be initiated into the sannyas order with his wife that looked like him. Short, thick glasses. They seemed to be a nice Vaishnava couple. But at the time, it was recommended that you leave your wife, you leave your kids. You will be more spiritual if you are a monk, a sannyas. So On the day of his taking sannyas, I was there. I helped him put his dhoti on the sannyas way, because I had just received sannyas a few months before in Sydney, Australia. Swami Bhaktivedanta had said, Hanuman is ready to be a sannyas, a monk, somebody renouncing sex for life. He never asked me any question about my sexuality. He never asked me if I was ready. He just said, you do this. And because I was very surrendered, I did that. I think this was one of the biggest mistakes of Swami Bhaktivedanta, to take just about anybody and without asking any questions about their background or sexuality, he would order them to be monk, to renounce sex completely for the rest of their life. It really backfired on him and on the Hare Krishna movement eventually. Hridayananda was known to be the intellectual of the Hare Krishna movement. He used to sit down and give long lectures about comparing this philosophy with this other philosophy. At the time, I had just come back from living in India, went to the Kumbh Mela, where I witnessed many yogis in various spiritual trance. I was just coming back from living in Thailand, where I was the first devotee to distribute books to all the universities in Thailand. Every morning, for months, I used to go and have philosophical discussions with Buddhist monks at the Buddhist University of Bangkok. So when I heard the lectures of Hridayananda that everybody thought was so intellectual, I thought he was such a nerd. Swami Bhaktivedanta did ask me to bring him with me to Open Center in South America. I told him I did not want to be with this guy. I could not stand him. Swami Bhaktivedanta understood, and I went alone to Open Centers. I opened a temple in Venezuela, and I opened a temple in Buenos Aires. Eventually, by 1974, I was fed up of the hypocrisy in the Hare Krishna movement, especially that Swami Bhaktivedanta had given permission to Bali Mardan, who was a sannyasin, who took sannyas the same day that I did in Sydney, Australia. He gave him permission to leave his monkhood and to get married with an Asian woman who was, they said, was the heiress to the Toyota fortune. She was worth possibly billions. It was all a scam. Eventually, ISKCON found out that the billionaire woman was actually a prostitute from New York. That created a great deception in me about Swami Bhaktivedanta that I thought was so wise, but actually he was not so wise. Some of you might be offended by what I think of Swami Bhaktivedanta. I think he had many qualities and he brought a lot of spiritual knowledge, but he also had some great defect. He was very naive. He was responsible for a lot of the use and abuse in the Hare Krishna movement, especially by his declaration that women were less intelligent than men because they had a smaller brain. He was responsible to organize the so-called Gurukula, the Hare Krishna schools, where hundreds of kids were abused physically, emotionally, and sexually. Some of his declaration that the black race was an ugly race, that homosexuality was demoniac activities, that some of his disciples that were really criminals and pedophiles, he declared them to be pure devotees of Lord Krishna, as he did with Hridayananda. So, for me, Swami Bhaktivedanta is a mixed bag. Lots of good, but also lots of mistake declaration and philosophies within the Hare Krishna movement. Hridayananda eventually took over the temples that I had opened in South America. It is obvious by the declarations of people who knew him very well that all of his life he had a burning lust within himself that he tried as much as possible to control. One of his secretaries wrote that often he would get up in the morning and he would give his underwear full of semen to his secretary and say, go wash this for me. He is somebody that has put in charge of various temples in South America, people that were crazy, sadistic, abusive. He is somebody also that has organized all kinds of marriages that became disasters. He himself gave the orders of sannyas to people that were crazy and committed suicide, like this guy, Viraha Prakash. At one point in Mexico, Viraha Prakash wanted to become a sannyasin, and I told Swami Bhaktivedanta, watch out, this guy is mentally crazy. And Swami Bhaktivedanta listened to me. He did not give him sannyas. But a few months later, Hridayananda gave him sannyas, and this guy did a complete disasters with the temples in South America, eventually killing himself with a shotgun to his own head. If there's one that I really despise among the gurus of ISKCON, it is Hridayananda, who to this day keep his little guru business and the money of his activities coming in. He has no self-realization whatsoever. It is an intellectual understanding at best. Nothing truly spiritual or mystical. Rameshvar, another Jewish guy who did not mind that Swami Bhaktivedanta said that Adolf Hitler was a nice guy. I knew little about him. I met him often in Los Angeles. All I remember is hearing one time that if somebody would get out of line, if somebody would misuse the teaching of the Hare Krishna movement, Rameshvar said, I'm going to send one of my disciples to kill them. That's what disciple had become in the mind of Rameshvar. He had the power of life and death over people. And as mentioned in the book of Henry, Killing for Krishna, it is clear for me that Sulochan died because Rameshvar contacted the authorities in New Vrindavan stating, okay, he is here and he's sleeping in his van. You can come and we're keeping an eye on him. And that's how Sulochan got killed. And Rameshvar was an integral part of that killing. Bhagavan Das, one of the biggest ego to ever been in ISKCON. He gave up his wife, he gave up his young son so that he could have a grab at that power to be a guru, something that he did regret later on when he found out that his son had been sexually abused terribly in the Hare Krishna schools, when he himself was pursuing the glory of being a guru in the Hare Krishna movement. Last time I saw him in France, he had a castle somewhere outside Paris. He knew that I had opened the temple in Paris, but he did not care to even say thank you. The 100 of devotees that were living around this castle, and possibly more than 50 children in that schools, were living in abject misery, and he was living in an apartment upstairs of the castle with fine carpets, beautiful French furniture, all kinds of silver plates. He wanted to be seen as a king. One of the stories that Jayatirtha told me is that after Jayatirtha left ISKCON, Bhagavan went to England and told the devotees that he will reinitiate the disciple of Jayatirtha. He apparently made a line on the floor and told the disciple of Jayatirtha, those who are with me come on this side of the line, and those who remain on the other side, they were just thrown out of the temple at the time. This was a very mentally sick guy who thought he was the greatest spiritual master in the world. A few months after that, he escaped with one lady living in the temple in France, and apparently months later he was selling cheap painting door to door somewhere in California. A very big change from the time that his disciple brought to him a brand new Jaguar, and he looked at it and he said he did not like the color. He wanted another Jaguar of another color. This was one very screwed up human being that made hundreds of disciples go all over Europe and collect money for him 7 days a week. And these were the ISKCON original guru that I knew personally. And from this beginning in 1977, we have now hundreds of people who have declared themselves gurus, spiritual master. I'm going to tell you more about those new gurus in part 3 of this series. Thank you very much, and namaste.